Okay, we've got some clay here. This is for beginning students, people who've never had any clay experience. Most people have had a little bit. Um, they choose not to admit it oftentimes, but most of us have made mud pies in our lives. So start out with your bag of clay, open it up. Don't cut little pieces off. Cut off a nice little section of clay, okay? You're not going to use that much clay for your first pinch pot. So cut that into quarters. And that'll give you some nice little blocks of clay. Okay, if that's too big for you, cut that in half. But remember to keep your clay damp at all times. Keep it covered up, keep it in plastic. So I'll work with that section and I'll keep these covered up. Clay begins to dry out, loses its plasticity, and cracks develop, makes it difficult. So we're going to move this out of the way and get down to it. All right, so we got our little block of clay here, and the reason I said take a block of clay, we're not wedging this clay. Wedging is just simply a way to create one homogeneous mass, remove air bubbles, make the clay consistent in terms of moisture content. So rather than squeezing this clay and putting air into it, we want to knock the corners off, and you can use the table to do that. I have a nice little canvas covered area that I'm working on here. But I prefer to get it in my hands and just slap it, and try not to create crevices, fissures, creases, anything that can create a weak spot. Basically what you're doing is waking this clay up because it's set for a very long time. Okay, this is a pretty good sized piece of clay. I'm gonna go with a much smaller piece for this first demonstration, okay? Make things easier for all of us, right? So I'm just gonna use my wire tool, hold it tightly. Notice that I'm not wrapping this around my fingers. This can cut, so this nice little piece of wood on the end, I'll wrap it around that, and I can hold it tight, and I can just slice right through the clay. Okay, so now I have two halves, and actually this is how I prepare for my next demonstration. Got some nice plastic here. Keep that wrapped up, and I'll work with this. So now, make a ball out of this the same way. A little more comfortable in my hands, a little more manageable. The longer I work with this clay, the more the surface is going to dry out on me. If that happens, cracks are going to develop, and cracking is something that we kind of want to avoid. You know, something like this is not a big deal. If you get it, you know, you can just rub over it. That's fine. But if I continue to talk and not work, this is going to dry out on me. So I'm using my left hand here, place the ball of clay in my left hand, and with my right hand, placing my fingers under my left hand, and use my thumb and just come in directly. Don't press it down like this. It's not a motion like this. You have to use the tip of your thumb and press in like you're going to push all the way through. So don't push all the way through. You'll end up with a donut. But press all the way in. Try to leave yourself, half inch or so at the bottom. You can't really judge that right now. Eventually, you'll be able to do that over time. It just takes time working with the materials, working with the clay, and creating a sense of how deep you can push that clay. There are ways that you can test how thick it is using a needle tool and probing through it, but we're not going to bother with that right now. This is a very simple 101 pinch pot. So with your thumb inside, holding it in the palm of your hand, you're going to just pinch gently between the thumb and these 4 fingers. While doing that, release, roll, and do the same thing. You're rotating the clay in the palm of your hand, of your left hand, while pinching it with your right. When you go around once or twice, you'll find that you've centered the hole in the clay. So you've got a centered pinch pot. This is actually a pinch pot. Very unrefined pinch pot, so we'll continue with it. It's the same motion. Pinch, rotate, pinch, rotate, pinch, rotate. Try to keep a rhythm going. Now, I have music playing in my head. I would have it in the background, but there may be some proprietary issues don't want to have to deal with. So if music works for you, turn some on in the background. I love it. I can't work without it, so I've always got it going when I'm in my studio. So you're going to get to a point, you may say, oh, my thumb's killing me, I'm wearing out. You're going to get to a point where you can't really feel like you're pinching and the piece is not growing. So you don't want it to really fan out necessarily at this point. You can do that, but if you do it too soon, you'll never be able to bring it back in. So use your thumb in this sort of motion. So you're pulling the clay up on the inside, correct? Okay, so holding it this way. And I don't usually pinch pots on the side. This is just to try to show you. I'm up here doing this and just rotating. If you maintain consistency in terms of pressure and the amount you're turning the piece, you will relatively maintain consistent wall thickness, okay? So looking at the interior, you see it's a little bit rugged still, but this is really in its early stage, right? This crack that is starting to show up here, simply rub over it. If you don't like the cracks, some people really embrace them. They can be very beautiful in a pinch pot. This is just absolutely a handmade piece, right? It doesn't get any more primal than this. This is how, this is the very beginning of ceramics. People were pinching pots. Well, they weren't pinching pots 30,000 years ago, but they were pinching out little forms, little deities, little animal figures for spiritual and religious beliefs. It was another 20,000 years that went by before we began making pots. So now I'm kind of reversing. I'm kind of using a little bit more pressure on the outside because I don't want this to fan out too big. But I do want to get the walls a little more consistent. I'm leaving a little bit more thickness up here. If this gets thin, you're going to have a lot of trouble. So leave some thickness on the rim. You can always thin that out later. But if it gets too thin early, you'll lose structure and lose control. I'm beginning to stretch now from the bottom and pull up. I don't know if you can see this. Just stretching the bottom out, giving a little bit more shape to the piece. So, pinching pots is really, really a wonderful, cathartic, peaceful, healing activity. And we can all use that in our lives. If it's frustrating for you initially, trust me, over time, it will get much better. Now I can use these fingertips on the inside. I want to make sure that the bottom thickness is not too great. And I'm really just stretching the clay now. You can see my finger movement across the bottom. Don't want to push through it, of course. It comes to a point in every pinch pot's life that you have to set it aside. You've worked it to the point where it's not going to be able to support itself. So I'm much thinner down here than I am up here at this point. So I can continue working on this, but not for much longer without really compromising the piece itself. So what do you do? What you do is you start another one. And thankfully, I've got another piece right there. So rather than push through this, stretch it too thin, do bad things, I'll set it aside and allow it to firm up. So it'll just sit there upside down like this. If I set it the other way, it's going to get flat across the bottom, and I really don't want it flat across the bottom. I see a lot of people trying to pinch pots that way, and it's okay if that's what you're after, but it's so much nicer to have a rounded bottom in a pot. It's just way more comfortable, and they fire more consistently. You can put them through more radical situations, and in terms of firing, they tend not to break. If you have sharp corners, things like that, that leads to stress points, and that can cause breakage. Okay, we're going to pick up where we left off in part 2 of this video.